Good afternoon. My name is Aissa, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Anna Costa for inviting me today. And I wanted to talk to you about PassivHaus, because its methodology and its standard is going to be instrumental to meet our climate change emergency targets. But the real question is the UK ready for PassivHaus? This is Lofting House. It's a low-carbon PassivHaus project. My clients, Jeremy and Louise, wanted to have a low-energy consumption home because they were living in a 17th century cottage, and it was really lovely, but very drafty, and the bills were astronomical. So after much conversations, they decided to go for PassivHaus. And the experience was enlightening, both in positive and very frustrating ways. So today I want to talk to you about what happens when you push the building industry beyond its comfort zone. PassivHaus is a voluntary standard from Germany. This gentleman here is Professor Wolfgang. He's here standing with his family in front of the first PassivHaus certified project. The goal of PassivHaus is simple: to minimize, as far as physically possible, the heating and cooling demands. And to do this, it uses a whole building approach. So there's no add-ons, no supplements. It's not a tick box exercise. And the best thing about it is that it works. So a typical PassivHaus dwelling has 77 to 90% less energy demands than the usual house. So Professor Wolfgang is right to be proud of what he's done. But I did some digging, and actually, this is not the first PassivHaus that was ever built. Meet the Fram. This is a ship built for polar expeditions in 1893, almost 100 years earlier. And by the diaries of the explorer Nansen, we find out that it uses PassivHaus principles such as very thick walls, air tightness, triple glazing, and it was so comfortable that they were even thinking of removing the stove. The Fram was really groundbreaking in its day because of its outstanding construction. And that's just what a PassivHaus building is. It's a very, very well-built vessel. All the details, all the materials, every item is examined and tested. And PassivHaus demands a very, very high-quality construction. And for the explorers at the Fram, their life depended on this meticulous attention to detail. And as the building industry creates 35 to 80 to 40% of the CO2 emissions, maybe this is the attitude that we should have. Or else, how are we going to meet our climate targets and decrease the natural disasters, famine, and ultimately war? Just like the Fram, a PassivHaus has very thick walls, it's very high insulation. Air tightness is 0.6 air changes an hour. As far as windows is concerned, only triple glazing will do. It has a balanced mechanical heat and ventilation to draw fresh air in, and eliminating cold bridges, so sealing all the gaps and taping all the gaps. And this is what things got really interesting, because every detail, especially the junction details, are put through a specialist software called PHPP by a certified consultant. And suddenly, all of my best practice knowledge was put to a test, and I could see where I was going wrong before anything was built. I had thermal imaging helping me to make design decisions based on evidence. And for my project, it was really difficult to find certified designers, but this landscape is changing. I was very surprised to find out that actually Great Britain has twice as many certified designers than Germany, and it's actually third in the world. Sarah Darwin here, she helped me with my project as a certified designer, and we had often sits to have really collaborative processes. And it wasn't just the consultants, it was the contractor, the suppliers, the subcontractors, for us to find the best buildable solution. Because PassivHaus is not the usual risk transfer game that we're used to in the UK. Construction details and conversations with the contractor happen much earlier in the process. And the process needs to be truly collaborative. And I'm not hinting here at the workshops. I'm talking about the contractor, the contract, the consultant's appointments, the program, and the budget needs to be adjusted to allow for this co-design process. Collaboration is encouraged in every building process, of course. But conversations are far more in-depth in a PassivHaus project. And there's a lot of emphasis in iteration. And of course, collaboration is the key for details to be translated from drawings to building on site. And we were lucky with our builders, because they were a 3-generation construction company that they were very invested on making sure that the practice will survive the murky waters of climate change. But that is a very rare occurrence, actually. And it's really difficult to find a contractor that is knowledgeable or even enthusiastic about PassivHaus. Usual complaints is time, checks along the way. A lot of people don't know how to price the risk. And education seems to be a key factor here. So what can we as educators do to change this? Certification seems to be a specialism at the moment. So should the methodology and the software, learning about methodology and the software in PassivHaus, should that be embedded in mainstream curriculums? So who wants a PassivHaus? There are 4 types of main clients. There are the bill warriors, and people who are worried about rising bills, just like Jeremy and Louise, but don't quite understand the intricacies of PassivHaus. And here, education again becomes key, because PassivHaus also requires a shift of thinking on a way of living. So little things like closing the blinds in the summer to reduce solar gain, and these things shouldn't be underestimated, because these small habits are very difficult to change. Next is the eco-warriors, people who know a lot about PassivHaus and can and want to make a positive contribution to climate change. However, the vast majority of the commissions for PassivHaus, it's social housing, especially in areas where the local authority really encourages the standard. There's also increasing pressure from funders to have the right credentials, the right environment and social governance credentials. This scheme, Golf Mills Street, was commissioned by Norwich Council, and it has 100 social housing units in it. And it won the Sterling Prize in 2019. However, much of the social housing has been sold and is in private hands. So the biggest contribution against climate change will come from volume house builders. And this is not good news, because they are not keen, they're reluctant to take risks, they want to build to minimum standards to maximize their profits, and also, unfortunately, the market is dominated by these big house builders, and they have the power and the resources to lobby the government against net zero targets. For example, in 2015, the carbon homes, the zero carbon homes was scrapped, for example. Meanwhile, in Brussels in 2013, Brussels introduced a law that all new buildings should meet the PassivHaus standard, and Oslo in 2014 did the same. A particular challenge in the UK is retrofit. 36% of houses in the UK were built before 1944. And most importantly, 80% of the housing in stock that will be around in 2050 has already been built. and the great majority is in private hands. So the current strategy is to promote renewables, change gas boilers for air source heat pumps, but that doesn't reduce demand. The fabric needs to be looked at. PassivHaus has Energy Fit. It's a relaxed standard for upgrading existing buildings. But just like any upgrade project, it's not easy and it can be expensive, but it's possible. It's Setland Road in Chorlton in Manchester. And this is the first Energy Fit Plus PassivHaus certified building. And the plus bit is because they actually exceeded the PassivHaus targets. These two semis can generate more energy than they consume. And I think we can all agree that they look great, even without the PassivHaus standards. And what I like most about them is this stained glass. This is the first solution globally of stained glass for PassivHaus. And this blows open the conversation about our built heritage. How can we upgrade and preserve our history? Will this compromise our historical environment? And can we afford not to upgrade it? So, PassivHaus, are we ready? Well, maybe not. We're not quite there yet. We may have the designer skills, but where are the contractors and the developers? And retrofit is still a big problem. Nonetheless, PassivHaus is coming, and there are some game changers here. We got pressure from funding bodies, we got the fuel spikes as well, and health. Whether we like it or not, PassivHaus is coming. And for example, the upcoming Future Homes Standard in 2025 is starting to use, it's still in the consultation, but the first draft is using language that is very, very similar to PassivHaus. If we're serious about meeting our climate emergency targets, then PassivHaus is the answer, because it significantly reduces demand. But it's not easy and it's not cheap. PassivHaus is a land transfer, it's not a band-aid. It requires commitment and skills. Thank you.